Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football, and the most important time to listen to the most accurate podcast, given that it is now fantasy football playoffs. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by friend in life, the man himself who already has early Week 15 rankings out for everyone on 4for4.com, none other than John Paulsen. Paulsen, how's it going, buddy?
It's going pretty good. Week 15, the start of the fantasy playoffs in most leagues, getting really into crunch time now, and hopefully lead some of our subscribers to and followers to championships this year.
Numerous nice DMs from the followers as well who have made the playoffs, but now it's time to put up or shut up as we have so many injury situations, usage fallouts to discuss that we'll get to on the show with, of course, also Director of Analytics himself here at 4for4, Sam Hoppen. Sam, how are you doing? And by the way, I looked ahead to Christmas Eve and saw that, I don't know if you've seen, it's going to be -3 here in Chicago. Are you ready for that as well?
Well, hi, John. Thanks for that
Welcome
lovely bit of information on a Wednesday afternoon. My wife and I were just complaining about how there is zero sun right now. And that's kind of killing the mood, but we're trying to push through it. Almost bought some tickets to a sunny place this weekend for a flight, but ended up not. So, yeah, we're doing good, though. The teams are looking good. Excited to help everyone else out and ready to get to it.
Well, before we begin, for all you cheapskates who are asking start-sit questions in the chat, we would like to promote John Paulsen's special show on Friday, Week 15 start-sit Q&A, Friday, December 16th, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, for the 4for4 YouTube subscribers, which you can become by simply going to the 4for4 YouTube channel. If you're watching this live right now, go ahead and click subscribe and like while you're at it ahead of time, and that will get you in to ask John your start-sit questions for the fantasy playoffs. To continue the most depressing time of the year, let's get to it. And let's start with Ken Walker practicing in full on Tuesday. The Seahawks, of course, have a short turnaround on Thursday night against the 49ers, and we are now expecting Walker to play. So, Paulsen, after Travis Homer rugged everyone on the Tony Jones news, out-touching Tony Jones 11-2. What are your thoughts on Ken Walker returning on Thursday in a tough matchup and likely being a bell cow in his first game back?
Yeah, that was kind of a weird deal. It hasn't been talked much about, probably because Homer didn't have a big game. But if he had a big game, everybody would be filleting Adam Schefter for getting that one wrong. It's a rare moment of misstep for Schefter, it appears. Not having having that backfield nailed down in terms of who's going to be the lead back, but it was Homer. He didn't do much. The Seattle running game's kind of struggled lately, and I'm not super optimistic about Walker this week coming back off of injury against the 49ers. They're averaging 3.28 yards per carry allowed to the running back position, just 58 yards on average rushing allowed to the running back position this season. Just not a whole lot of fantasy points available to running backs against the 49ers. It's one of the hottest defenses in the league. So he's more of a low-end RB2 for me this week, whereas he was in the midst of the RB1 rankings when he was much hotter in the mid-season. The running game was going a lot better for the Seahawks.
Anything else from this Seahawks offense you're noticing trend-wise, Sam? Because Geno Smith also came out and admitted to the media that he has not these past few games been taking what the defense is giving him, even forcing the issue against the Panthers, who were playing 2-eye safety against him, and he was still trying to hit the big shot rather than dumping it off to Travis Homer and his receivers and tight ends underneath. Anything to take away for the Seahawks offense, and again, what is likely their toughest matchup the entire year?
Yeah, I mean, I think I posted a chart yesterday just sort of looking at, what quarterbacks are doing in some of the easier situations. And Geno Smith has been doing really well at that. It's really his negative plays that kill him and the Seahawks. I think from a fantasy perspective, Marquise Goodwin has filled in as a great role player this year, has sort of fit in nicely with that offense. I don't think he's worth starting at this point, but both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, who I think might have a touchdown in like 5 or 6 weeks straight now, you're going to continue to start. I think they're passing the ball enough too. They have one of the highest pass rate over expectation over the last several weeks and continue to be throwing the ball a ton. So this matchup is tough for sure, but I do think that there is an opportunity for those key players, Metcalf and Lockett, to have solid days.
Amari Cooper told reporters that he would have to manage his core muscle injury and play through it practically the rest of the season is what we're thinking. And right now, Paulsen, we look at this Saturday Ravens-Browns game that has a 37.5-point total. Browns have an 18-point team total and have also been the worst offense in the league the last 2 weeks statistically. Just 16 offensive points on 23 possessions with Deshaun Watson under center. You love to see it. So what are your thoughts on Amari Cooper for this game, especially in one that he played through the injury this past week, and it was Donovan Peoples-Jones who sprouted up for a team high 12 targets and 27% target share?
Yeah, Cooper is popping in the week 15 breakout receiver model due to his underperformance based on his usage, which is about 12.9 fantasy points per game over the last 3 weeks. So that does indicate that the usage is there. It's also a home game, which he has traditionally done better at home than on the road this season. I don't know if that is just a quirk of the splits this year, but he's only had one big game on the road, and that was against the Bills. Otherwise, he's kind of stunk. Most of his big games have come at home. I have him ranked 19th right now, but I'm looking at who he's around: Christian Kirk, Jerry Jeudy, Mike Evans, kind of some other players that are kind of been up and down and maybe not the most confidence in heading into this week. I think I'd probably start him, but if I keep an eye on that injury report, if he's limited with his core muscle injury, then he'll probably slide down the rankings a little bit.
Do you have Donovan Peoples-Jones over Amari Cooper? And what are your thoughts on him for this week, given that the Ravens over the last month have actually been susceptible to the big play? They're allowing the highest completion rate in the league on throws 20 yards downfield. And as we know, Deshaun Watson has thrown it 5 times, 20 yards deep. Has only completed one of them these past 2 weeks, but all 5 of those targets have gone to DPJ.
Yeah, he's supposedly going to be attempting more passes downfield in the coming weeks. I still have Peoples-Jones ranked as a low-end wide receiver 3. But I mean, the Cooper's injury reports will play a big factor in that. If he's going to be limited in terms of his snaps, then DPJ will be moving up as Cooper moves down.
And given the team total, the matchup, the situation, and the fact there are no more buys, I can't imagine people are in a position where they would even have to start Deshaun Watson in a 1-quarterback league. I don't think you need to get there. And I think it's pretty thin, but I guess if you have to, sure. Otherwise, I'm trying to avoid it. On the other side of the ball in that matchup, though, J.K. Dobbins came out after his 100-yard, 1-touchdown performance, said he's not fully recovered, actually, from last year's ACL injury. And if you see that clip floating around on Twitter where he's basically running on one leg and doesn't outrun the defense despite breaking through the safety for a 40-yard run, then you can tell that he's still practically injured. What are your thoughts on J.K. Dobbins in this matchup, whether it be Tyler Huntley or Anthony Brown under center for the Ravens? Paulsen.
I think it's a great matchup. The Browns are 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. They've given up an average of 114 yards rushing, 1.08 touchdowns, 5.19 yards per carry to running backs this season. The Browns have been one of the best matchups for running backs all year. I think the concern with Dobbins is if he doesn't get a touchdown, maybe he has kind of a disappointing day because he doesn't catch a lot of passes, but he should be able to, if he gets another 15 carries, he should be able to crack 100 yards or be close to it and maybe score a touchdown as well.
And Sam, it's just usage that I still worry about. And if you told me to lean one direction of Dobbins getting more work or less work, especially on a short week in his first game back from injury, I would say less work. And the usage I'm speaking of, 43% of snaps, 15 carries to Gus Edwards 13 and no targets for either. It's honestly like a situation where if the bottom falls out, it could get ugly here.
It definitely could. And Dobbins' 15 opportunities on Sunday was just the 5th time this season that a Ravens running back has earned that many opportunities. Gus Edwards wasn't far behind. He had 13. So it's still pretty split from a workload perspective. I think the biggest concern I have with any Ravens running back is the lack of high-value touches. Dobbins has just one high-value touch in his last 3 games played, obviously scored the long touchdown. And I think what's going to sway people to starting Dobbins is this matchup again, against the Browns. They have by far the worst rushing defense in the league this year. I think, again, the Ravens are leaning a lot more run heavy at this point in the season than they did earlier on because of the injuries to the quarterback, injuries to their offensive skill players or pass catchers. So I would struggle to start J.K. Dobbins. I'd rather flex in a different receiver or something like that if possible. But I do think your concerns are extremely warranted.
Let's go to the Patriots rotating backfield as well, because what we saw on Monday night was Ramondre Stevenson suffer an ankle sprain, did try to return for a drive, had to get removed because he was injured, was not effective. Damian Harris, who was doubtful and didn't play that game, did actually travel with New England to Arizona. So we think there's an off chance he could play here. But if both are obviously out, Stevenson and Harris, that leaves Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris to then man this backfield in Week 15 against the Raiders. So let's say Damian is back for this game, Paulsen. What are your thoughts on this backfield and Damian in particular?
Yeah, they have J.J. Taylor on the practice squad too. Just want to mention that. Damian Harris would be the lead back if he's healthy, I think. But we don't know how healthy he is. He mentioned he traveled with the team, but he didn't practice at all Thursday, Friday, Saturday of last week. And the fact that he did travel with the team indicates that he was perhaps close to being activated. But nothing in the practice reports indicate that that was the case. You would think he would get a limited practice on Saturday if he was really close to playing. But again, why would he travel with the team? Why would they even take him with them and just have him stay in New England for treatment? But if he's back, I think he's a pretty decent start, though you have to wonder how healthy that thigh is. And if he's out, I think PR Strong, he didn't have as many touches, but it was only 8-7 between him and Kevin Harris, but he was far more productive in his work. He had 90 total yards and a touchdown, whereas Kevin Harris only had 26 yards rushing on 8 carries with a touchdown, even though he played 10 additional snaps over Pierre Strong. So I would lean, if you're talking, I think the tough decision is if Damian Harris is out, I think I would lean Strong, but it's probably going to be a committee, and they'll probably ride the hot hand if one develops.
Sam, yours and Connor Allen's FFPC team has moved on to fight for the overall title with a Chiefs stack too. Good for y'all. Myself, Connor, and Ryan Noonan's team eventually failed this past week because injuries just were too much for us to fight through. Nonetheless, if you are in a situation in these deeper leagues where it's just Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong available and a good spot against the Raiders, what are you doing in these deeper leagues with this backfield?
I would prefer Pierre Strong. He has, I think, that passing game work locked down for the Patriots if Ramondre Stevenson sits. And the Patriots seem to be very intent on running as many screen passes as they can. So this could be a game, even though the Patriots and the Raiders haven't been great, maybe has some sneaky shootout potential. I mean, it's one of those things where the Raiders have shown flashes, but the Patriots defense has been really good as well. But in any case, I do lean Strong. He had the long run in the game as well and had 5 carries for 70 yards. So I think there's a possibility that he could, if anything, get the majority of the work. I do still expect it to be a split backfield, but he did get 41% of the team's third down snaps and 3 of the 5 red zone snaps as well. So I would lean Pierre Strong over Kevin Harris at this point.
Yeah, I would just add that. Okay, just add that the Raiders have given up the most receiving yardage to running backs this year. So the point that Sam made about the passing down work does work in Strong's favor.
And as I wrote in the waiver column, yes, Kevin Harris ran 7 more routes than Strong, but the fact that Strong earned 3 targets on just 9 routes, and now we have a Patriots offense that, 1, isn't creative, just runs screens every other play, but 2, has targeted their running backs at the league's 2nd highest rate. It's a terrific situation for the receiving back, Pierre Strong in this case, if Damien Harris is ruled out. Paulsen, I have looked throughout the entire industry at their Week 15 rankings, and you, my good friend, are by far the highest on Isiah Pacheco against the Texans for Week 15, who is your RB12 of the week. So go ahead and give us your thoughts on the Chiefs' backfield after Jerick McKinnon finished as the overall RB1 in Week 14.
Yeah, I'm kind of making a statement there with the Pacheco ranking. I'm not sure he'll stick at 12, maybe 12, 13, 14 with Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb below him. But it's just, a great matchup. Sam talked about who were we talking about? The worst rushing defense in the league just now. Oh, the Browns. You look at the Texans. They're trying to have the worst. 166 yards rushing, 4.8 yards per allowed. The most rushing yards allowed in the league, 21.56 on the year. They're 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. I think the one concern here is that he's getting pulled a little bit in the red zone for Jerick McKinnon, but McKinnon had 2 touchdowns last week, and I think it's probably Pacheco's turn to score. He runs so hard. I think they'll reward him with a rushing touchdown this week, and he should, push for 100 yards rushing.
Sam, thoughts on the Chiefs' backfield moving forward? Because honestly, if this were a close game, given that the Texans now have a secret weapon in Jeff Driscoll, I would lean towards Jerick McKinnon since he was clearly in the game because the team, per beat reporters, quote unquote, trusted him more in a competitive game. But that's the point. We don't think this will be a competitive game, given that the Chiefs are 14-point road favorites over the Texans here. So we think it is going to pave the way for Pacheco to run wild.
Yeah, and I think we might have touched on this a bit last week, but these two have, as I mentioned last time, 2 very distinct roles. Pacheco is the rusher for this team, while McKinnon is the receiving back at this point. So both of them had at least 15 opportunities last week. They about split the snaps as well as they have the last 2 weeks. So I think both of these players are startable. Jerick McKinnon, though, has the edge in the red zone. He's played on 54% of the team's red zone snaps over the last 3 weeks compared to 40% for Pacheco. But again, to Paulsen's point, I was just taking a look. So the Texans allow the most rushing yards per game at 167. I was looking at, from an EPA per play perspective, the Browns are worst here. So either way you look at it, the Texans are bad. You saw Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott do well against that team, against that defense last week. So I have no qualms with really starting either of these players in Week 15.
Let's move on to another situation because Mike White, in both mine and Paulsen's opinion, is a QB1 this week. And Paulsen, you weren't ready for this conversation, but I want to spin it into a start-sit situation with Tua Tagovailoa as well, because given the fact that we saw now Tua's success come against the Lions, Bears, Browns, and Texans, and then complete just 46% of his passes the past 2 games against the Niners and Chargers, the Dolphins also sitting with a 17-point team total on the road in bad weather Saturday night against the Bills, I would start Mike White over Tua this week. But your thoughts on Mike White against the Lions and just where you have him ranked among some top-tier options for people?
Yeah, I mean, Mike White's health is a question mark. The ribs, he took a really tough shot to the ribs, as most of us have seen. Really amazing that he came back and was able to play. So it does appear that he's going to play, but I mean, they still are kind of talking about it as if he's not certain to play. So that's just something to monitor as we get
Maybe
into
we don't take everything the player says into account, but he did say he's ready to go. So whatever that means.
Detroit is 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterback, so it's a great matchup. As you mentioned, I have him ranked as a low end quarterback 1 at like 14, high end quarterback 2. I have Tua in that same range, so I think it certainly is debatable. And you're looking at this weather in Buffalo; they're going to get hit with another storm, but it's not the feet of snow that we saw when they moved the game to Detroit. And I was talking with Chris Allen about it, and it doesn't sound like it's going to be too significant. But it is something to monitor. The snow will be falling during the game, and there is going to be wind that's in that 10 to 13 mile per hour. It's also going to be very cold, so the conditions aren't going to be great for the Miami passing game. He does add a little bit as a runner, not much, but this Miami passing game has been excellent all year. And then you're comparing that to the Jets, where Mike White has a lot of enthusiasm around him. But when you look at his overall numbers so far, I think he has 3 passing touchdowns in that first game. His first start, he has 2 interceptions in his second. And then I don't think he did either touchdown or interception last week. He did rush for a touchdown against the Vikings, I believe. So it's not like he set the world on fire. It would be a matchup play for me with White. The pass attempts have been there for Mike White. They've been a kind of a run-oriented team with Zach Wilson under center, but they've been kind of featuring White a little bit more in the passing game. And then you could see a scenario where the Lions offense can keep up and can score a little bit on the Jets. I'm not so sure that this Lions offense is built to score on the road against the Jets, but we will see. Maybe there's a sneaky shootout aspect here. The Jets defense is just playing so well lately. Whereas the Bills, you could see a shootout in that game too. You also could see a really low scoring game with the weather. So it's a tough call. I would just monitor the rankings throughout the week as as we get a little bit better handle on the weather.
I would just note Jared Goff, 2 touchdowns at home compared to 20 touchdowns at home compared to just 2 in 5 games on the road this year. And Detroit, of course, has allowed 5 top 5 finishes to quarterbacks in their last 7 games, including 3 overall QB1 weeks. I will be starting Mike White over Jared Goff personally, given the matchup as well. Yeah. I want to spin this, though, to Elijah Moore conversation. Everyone wants to get their licks in here. No big deal. Sam, let's go ahead and start with you for the Jets wide receivers overall. It's Elijah Moore getting the hype, of course, but we still have Garrett Wilson being the #1 receiver on this team. What are your thoughts overall here for Jets wide receivers?
Garrett Wilson, most certainly still the wide receiver 1, only had 6 targets this past week, which was a little confusing, but he is firmly the team's first option. He ran a route on every single drop back this past week. But Elijah Moore, from a usage perspective, had his best game of the season, had a season high 10 targets, 6 receptions, second most receiving yards at just 60, ran a route on 94% of the team's dropbacks. I think the biggest part of that is Corey Davis leaving the game early. As of this morning, Davis is still in concussion protocol. So I think with the way we've seen things go this season, it seems unlikely that Davis plays this upcoming week. And again, to everything that Paulsen said about the matchup against Detroit, I think Mike White, especially if Mike White is starting, Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson are both viable starters in this Jets offense.
Go ahead with your Elijah Moore tangent, Paulsen.
Yeah, he's actually startable this week. We've been kind of dancing around it, and he's been hitting some waiver wires after a few goose eggs in the middle of the season. His snaps had taken a big cut, but he 82% snap share last week. He ran 47 routes compared to Garrett Wilson's 51. As Sam mentioned, that had a lot to do with Corey Davis only running 6 routes last week. I'm not expecting Corey Davis to play and get cleared in time. It's very rare this year to get concussed in a game and turn around and play the following week. It's more often than not that the player sits at least 1 week. So given the matchup against the Lions and the fact that he's going to play 80-90% of the snaps, I think this is a good spot. I have him ranked as a low-end wide receiver 3.
Lions also allowing a league high in receiving yards per game to opposing slot receivers, where more still played when Corey Davis exited the game because Denzel Mims came in on the boundary last week. And then, of course, in their last 4 games since the bye, Corey Davis has been limited or inactive in 2 of those games. And that's when Elijah Moore was back in Robert Saleh's good graces and recorded at least an 18% target share in those 2 games as well. It just sets up well for Moore. And honestly, I would start him over DJ Chark, given the matchup, and Jameson Williams. But go ahead and talk on Jameson Williams, Paulsen, since maybe he earns enough reps to be a flex option. Maybe.
Well, I think he went from 1 route to 6 routes. So if we extrapolate, we're going to be at 36 routes this week.
By week 23.
That is some math right there.
No. 1 times 6 is 6, and then 6 times 6 is 36.
That's
just breaking down my math for you there. I don't think we're going to get there anytime soon, but I think we mentioned on the pod, or it was the Friday pod, where he is somebody that can make an impact in 1 play, and that's what happened last week with the touchdown. And you just can't start a player that's only running 6 routes. You have to be, if you are going to start him, you have to be hoping that they continue to ramp him up, and now he's getting closer to 20 because it's just not sustainable, especially as you mentioned on the road against the Jets. Really tough matchup for receivers, tough matchup for quarterbacks. Jared Goff, as you mentioned, the 2 touchdowns on the road, just unlikely that Goff is going to have a lighted up type game. So this is certainly a player I would probably stay away from, given that we have no teams on bye and plenty of options to choose from.
Sam, DJ Chark, Jameson Williams, worry here on the road in New York, given that we still believe in Amon-Ra above everyone else.
For sure. I think there needs to be a little cold water poured on Jameson Williams' fantasy value, because Paulsen mentioned he can have a day with 1 catch, but that's the same for every single fantasy player. They can, score a long touchdown. And at this point in the fantasy playoffs, where it's a win or go home, you can't trust someone who has run 8 total routes or 7 total routes over the last 2 weeks combined. Again, he's explosive. He's dynamic. I'm excited for him next year, but DJ Chark has been the team's primary deep threat this year. He has a 16.7 yard average depth of target, and it looks like he's fully recovered from his ankle injury with back-to-back 90-yard receiving games. So I think both of these 2 will cannibalize each other as well with the type of receiver that they are, and there's no way I would trust Jameson Williams in any of my lineups.
If Nico Collins were out, did not practice at any point ahead of week 14, and I don't expect Brandon Cooks to play at all for the rest of the year, I would also start Chris Moore, who was basically used like Devontae Adams, like 52% of the team's receiving yards, 40% of team targets, 39% of the team's air yards. I would start Chris Moore also over these Lions receivers, other than Amon-Ra St. Brown this week. Let's also have the Okonkwo discussion, because it needs to be weaved in with Mark Andrews talk, since no one wants to start Mark Andrews, given that he has not recorded over 70 receiving yards or scored a touchdown in 6 consecutive games. The issue is, Paulsen, if you add those complaints to the context, like Andrews has still been a top 12 tight end in 3 of those 6 games because the position doesn't matter. We sit here and say it every week. So like he's still a top 12 tight end, but can you do better? Probably. So what are your thoughts on Okonkwo? Let's assume Treylon Burks is out and Mark Andrews.
Well, is Tyler Huntley at quarterback? Because if he's there,
we don't know yet. And honestly, like, does it even matter? I don't even.
I think it matters. I think it matters for Andrews, given his numbers with Huntley last year, and I would have a tough time benching him for Chig. But Burks is still in the concussion protocol, so I think Okonkwo is certainly a tight end 1 streamer and a pretty good option given his recent usage. He's only playing about half the snaps, but when he's out there, they're targeting him aggressively, and I think he's earning those targets, and obviously got the touchdown last week, but I think he had 68 yards receiving the week before. But with Burks out, they're just so lacking for playmakers in the passing game. And this is a game against the Chargers where they may need to throw the ball more. I mean, they're going to try to run Henry and control the game that way because the Chargers are among the worst in rushing yards allowed. But if the Chargers put up some points on a very suspect Tennessee passing defense, then they're going to have to throw the ball some. And I think Okonkwo will be a big part of that.
Sam, any thoughts on the Titans passing game? We would expect them to have to go through the air, given that what Jalen Hurts and Trevor Lawrence has done in back-to-back games. Justin Herbert is about to win fantasy leagues in week 15.
It certainly looks that way. I mean, I think Okonkwo is a solid starter going forward. He's averaging 5.7 targets per game over the last 3 games, as a 17% target share. The concern is that he's not running a ton of routes. He hasn't hit over 60% routes run in each of the last 3 weeks, while Austin Hooper has been above that mark in 2 of the last 3 weeks. So it doesn't look like they're going to make Okonkwo the full-time guy. But if that route usage starts to bump up a little bit, again, his targets per route run rate is great because of that. But I do think the game script will fall in a way where the Titans are forced to throw the ball a little bit more. And the Chargers defense is still struggling with a lot of injuries as well. So I think this could be a potential shootout game with both of these teams. And Okonkwo has a good opportunity to fall into the end zone, which would make him the tight end 1 on the week.
I know some people have also been confused with me being consistent and mentioning Okonkwo will go back to the bench if Treylon Burks is healthy. But like, that's literally what we saw in weeks 10 through 12 with Burks healthy. The Titans used 11 personnel 3 wide sets as their primary package on 47% of snaps. And of course, Austin Hooper was the starting tight end. And that's why Okonkwo wasn't used at all. The past 2 games with Treylon Burks injured and then out, they've used 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets on 49% of snaps as their primary package. And yet Austin Hooper has not only run more routes than Okonkwo in back-to-back games, he's been on the field in 11 personnel in that time whenever they've had to call another receiver in place of Burks to be on the field. So I think it's very clear Okonkwo's basically going to be useless whenever Burks comes back. The thing is, that was a massive hit a couple weeks ago. And as of Wednesday, Burks is still in concussion protocol and not practicing. So still a good chance Okonkwo hangs on here. Let's get to some charts ahead of week 15, though. And Sam, you want to begin with the Panthers running backs, because now we've seen in Sam Darnold's 2 starts that the playoff-bound Panthers, who control their own destiny, are hiding Sam Darnold. And who can blame them? The highest run play rate in neutral game script in these 2 games, and also 40 running back carries per game. So what are your thoughts on this backfield rotation?
So before the bye week, D'Onta Foreman had sort of dominated the workload. He had a 54% snap share, 66% of, the backfield carries. In that sense, Christian McCaffrey had left the team. He returned. He got a 21 carry outing. He had 3 carries inside the 10, but unfortunately failed to convert any of those into a touchdown. And then Chuba Hubbard came in and found the end zone on his lone carry inside the 5. But Hubbard had 14 carries and looks like the passing down guy in this offense. He saw 3 targets. He played on 85% of the team's third down snaps. So if Hubbard is out there and you're struggling for running back production, I think Hubbard is certainly worth an add at this point. And I don't think their game against the Steelers this week is going to force them to throw the ball a ton. But if they're in a situation where they might be, then I think Hubbard is worth probably a start. I mean, it's probably closer in my mind between Hubbard and J.K. Dobbins than I think people think, because again, Hubbard is a no-name. Dobbins was explosive last week, but we pointed out all the concerns earlier. And with the matchup, like I said, I think I would still lean Dobbins, but Hubbard is certainly someone to keep an eye on.
And the Panthers are favored by nearly a field goal in this game over what will definitely be Mitch Trubisky under center, given that it was Kenny Pickett's second concussion in the last 2 months. And I've been arguing, Paulsen, that Hubbard has the higher floor, like Sam mentioned, over Foreman, given that Hubbard has at least a 9% target share in 2 of his last 4 games with Foreman, whereas Foreman hasn't even reached a 7% target share in any of the last month with Hubbard. But at the same time, Foreman has the higher ceiling because he has 7 touches inside the 10-yard line to just Hubbard's 2 in that time.
Yeah, I think this is a tough backfield because they will go hot hand. So whoever's doing well tends to get fed, and that could be Foreman next game. He didn't have a good game last week at all compared to Hubbard, and given the matchup, it was really disappointing. But I have them both ranked as low-end RB3s this week, just not knowing who's going to kind of take off. But the couple things I noticed about the chart and just wanted to mention is Rachaad White showing up nicely in the chart, and he's also held on to the starting job with Fournette back. Fournette did play 47% of the snaps, but was out-touched 18-10. So it does seem like, it wasn't that limited, Fournette, and almost got doubled up in touches. So I'm wondering if this is a real shift now in this backfield. And, everybody talks about how White is not as good as Fournette in terms of his analytics, but his yards per carry has been 4.31 or higher in 3 of the last 4 games. Which is something that we've talked about a number of times on this podcast, in that the Bucs can't run the ball, but he's been really good actually the last 4 weeks running the ball. The other player I wanted to mention is Alvin Kamara. It's kind of flying under the radar, the Mark Ingram injury. With Ingram out, Kamara's touches should increase pretty significantly. They've got David Johnson there and Dwayne Washington, who I think is actually the RB2 there. They might run Taysom Hill a little bit more, but whenever Mark Ingram has missed time when they've played together, he and Kamara has really seen his touches and his floor rise. So I think he's a solid RB1 this week with the Falcons.
Kamara has handled 85% of backfield touches in 4 games Ingram was injured or inactive for this year, compared to just 71% of the team's touches and 7 surrounding games with Mark Ingram. You also want to discuss the ongoing Bengals running backs situation, Sam, as we saw Samaje Perine did get out-touched 16-5, but ran 3 more routes than Joe Mixon. And honestly, given the statuses of T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, I do think Samaje Perine hangs around as the team's second, third best receiver, and does offer flex value for deeper leagues, like if you're that desperate and snuck into the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't know if you mentioned Hayden Hurst either. Not sure what his status for the game is this week, but the Bengals could be struggling for pass catching options, like you mentioned. Mm-hmm. Mixon returned to a 57% snap share compared to just 38% for Samaje Perine, but Perine did have 2 more red zone snaps than Mixon and got the lone carry inside the 10, and they were both even in high value touches on the game. We've seen the Bengals want to use Perine as the pass catching back, and in most of their 2-minute drill drives, it's Perine who's on the field instead of Mixon. So I think with the way this offense is going, and again, they're good enough, I think that Perine is worthy of being started as a flex option, and is someone I would most certainly, again, I don't want to keep going back to Dobbins, but I'm sure he's on the minds of a lot of people. I'd probably rather start Perine over Dobbins at this point.
Any thoughts on the Bengals offense without T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd this week? Tyler Boyd, who I think is going to miss the next 2 games.
I think both players have some upside as receivers, but Perine has been the better, I guess, fantasy receiver among the 2 between him and Mixon. But the thing that I noted was that Mixon's 58% snap rate was his lowest in any non-injury game this season. So they did seem to make a concerted effort to get Perine on the field for at least another series than what he's been seeing with Mixon healthy, which does give him a bit more flex value. And we've seen him have big games even with Mixon healthy, specifically as a receiver. So there is some upside there given all the injuries in Cincinnati.
Sam, you also want to discuss, we talked about earlier, the Browns wide receivers, but you have a chart that goes more in depth on that situation.
Yep. So Paulsen mentioned earlier that the offensive coordinator for the Browns said he wants Deshaun Watson to throw the deep ball more often. If you have the lovely Fantasy Life app, you would have known that several hours ago as well. But the best part about the Browns right now is that they're one of the more concentrated passing attacks. It's really just Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones as the only two wide receivers. They're the only two who have run a route on at least 55% of the team's dropbacks this season and who are averaging more than 3 targets per game. I mentioned last week that the Browns had a negative 17% pass rate over expectation in their win against the Texans. It was at negative 2.2% this past week. So still negative, but I guess a step in the right direction for these pass catchers. And David Njoku has been playing well as well, so he's been involved. But I do think that Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones can be flex-worthy options going down the stretch here with assuming that Cooper is healthy and playing.
Any thoughts for what people are doing with the Browns wide receivers beyond this week as well, Paulsen, since coming up, yes, they have the Ravens this week, but also the Saints the following week?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Deshaun Watson era has not gotten off to the greatest start in Cleveland. And, you know, he did throw for over, I think it was 275. Game 2 went a little bit better in terms of what you're expecting from an NFL passing attack. And I think he's going to get there. He has a history of being a top 5 fantasy quarterback. So I think it might take some time to shake off the rust, maybe more than some of us thought that he thought he would come right back in and be a QB1. But, you know, as you mentioned this week, I would not feel great about starting him against the Ravens. This looks like it's going to be a low scoring game. But they are showing some willingness now to throw the ball a bit more, and especially when they do fall behind like they did with Cincinnati, that they were willing to kind of cut loose and get away from the very run heavy ways. So I think that does bode well for Njoku, Cooper, and Donovan Peoples-Jones in the long run.
And finally, Sam, you want to discuss the Rams wide receivers from Baker Mayfield, who recorded 61% of his passing yards on the last 2 drives. I attribute that to the Raiders being the worst team in the NFL, not to anything he did.
I can hear the inflection in your tone that you're not super excited about this, and people should not be excited about the Rams receivers either, since Cooper Kupp and Allen Robinson both were, I guess, sort of ruled out for the year. Tutu Atwell, Ben Skowronek, and Van Jefferson have 16, 14, and 14 targets respectively. It's just too dispersed, and I don't know how Baker Mayfield won Offensive Player of the Year just based on one good drive alone. I just think, again, with it being too spread out and this team just not having any consistency whatsoever, you can quickly dismiss anything that has happened with the Rams in the past and going forward.
They're definitely a joke, but honestly, like in deeper leagues, if I had to choose one, like at least we saw 9 targets on the 3rd most routes for Tutu Atwell this past game from Baker. But not only that, he has 6 carries the past 2 weeks, and he was reportedly pulled into like running backs and tight end meetings in practice these last few days because they're trying to like get him more concerted targets and teach him the offense more. So if I had to choose one for deeper leagues, I'm actually leaning more on Atwell than Van Jefferson, who was on the field for a route on 100% of dropbacks this past game.
Well, Skowronek had 7. Is it Skowronek? I don't know how to pronounce his name. 7 for 80. Skowronek. He had 7 for 89 on 8 targets, which is pretty nice rapport, pretty good usage. But I mean, I think he'd be a PPR deep league only flyer. I think Atwell is interesting. He had the 2 carries for -5 yards, so he did at least have 2 carries. They're trying to get him the ball in the running game. Led the team in targets, which I think is the key. 9 targets, 5 for 50. And then Van Jefferson obviously got the headline because he caught the touchdown, but he only had 4 targets. I think Van Jefferson I think coming into this year, the general consensus was that he was probably the best of these three. But, right now we're looking at a very spread out passing game. We're not exactly sure who Mayfield's going to favor, but if you're looking at next week's game or next week's box score, and Skoranek and Atwell are both 7+ targets, then it might start to pay attention to those guys as potential PPR fill-ins in deeper leagues. But I think a lot of people that are still playing at this point don't need to be looking at these players at all.
Ben Skoranek, the most I want to min cash this showdown slate player of all time. Also, Baker Mayfield and the Rams, 7.5-point dogs in the tundra of Lambeau on Monday night. So nothing to get excited about yet again. Paulsen, what else do you have coming out for the people at 4 this week?
Well, sneaky starts. Got the podcast on Friday. As you mentioned, I'm doing a Q&A with our YouTube subscribers, but you have to be a YouTube subscriber to 4for4 Football. At 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. I guess I'll be looking at my rankings and answering sit questions for a half hour. I've also got our AMA on our subscriber Discord on Thursday. Do that every week for about an hour, depending on how many questions I get there. But yeah, just getting ready for week 15.
The concurrent cheapstakes in the chat right now should go ahead and hit like and subscribe before they join your Friday Q&A. Sam, what else do you have on the site for everyone?
Hoppen to Conclusions was out this morning. The breakout article coming tomorrow. As always, plenty of charts on the Twitter feed, and that's it. We only got two more of these shows left. The season's flying by.
No complaints. I will be back with TJ Hernandez on Friday. People mentioning what are we doing about the Saturday games, and we will be opening the show with Saturday games and also have DFS articles on the Saturday slate for everyone, discussing in depth more for both DFS and redraft purposes. That Lions-Jets game we mentioned, but also Browns-Ravens, how to attack that. And then, of course, what I think is a terrible game between the Dolphins and Bills, much more than a lot of other people think. But we'll go in depth on the offensive situations on Friday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern, where I think I'll be recording around Chris Allen's poker night. I don't know. There's a lot of moving pieces here for Week 15 playoffs. So until then, we'll see everyone. Thank you for joining. And remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. See you next time.